Hello, so in this video we're going to see the very basics of how to use frequency adverbs in French. Frequency adverbs are words that allow you to say how often you do something. They're words like often, sometimes, twice a week, etc. We're going to be talking about frequency adverbs in the context of free time, which is one of the topics at Key Stage 3. We're going to talk a little bit about how to use it and show you some examples. As usual, it's very useful to have your vocab sheet with you to take some notes or perhaps some paper and then to keep this safely with your French books. You should pause whenever I ask a question to try and answer it yourself first and then press play again to hear the answer and see if you were right. So let's begin. The vocab sheet that you have has two sides. So this is the back side. So the list of frequency time phrases, frequency adverbs are here. And so they're the ones we're going to be using today. So firstly, let's have a closer look at them. And so you can see that they're divided into two sides. So we've got words like every day, etc. And we've got words like sometimes and often. Let's have a look at some examples of those words here and where you would put them in the sentence in English. So words like every day, 3 times a week, etc. So you might say, I play football every day. You might also say, every day I play football. Or you might say, I do judo from time to time. So looking at this, have a think about how we could say our little rule in English for using those words would be. So in English, we put those words here either at the end of a phrase, so after you've said your sentence or you've talked about the action, or before, so either at the start or at the end of a sentence. It might be part of a sentence, then you have a comma and then you say something different, so a different clause is at the start or the end of a sentence or a phrase or a clause. Let's have a look at example sentences in English of these two words and see perhaps it's the same. Perhaps you do have the same rules as these words in English. So a sentence that uses often. So I often play football. I sometimes do athletics. And I often do swimming. So let's see. Could we say that it goes at the start or at the end of a sentence? No. So these ones, they're always in the same place. They're always after I, and I is the subject, and they're always in front of these words. And that's going to be part of our rule in English. So play, do, and do. What kind of words are those? Are those adjectives, nouns, etc.? Have a think. They are verbs. So the rule in English is that these two frequency adverbs, you put them just before the verb. So just in front of the verb. I often play. You wouldn't say, I mean you could, but it's not as natural. You could say I play often football, but it's a bit more natural to put it there. You might sometimes, that is correct, you might say I play football often, or I do athletics sometimes, but it seems to be a little bit more common to put it just in front of the verb. And it's useful to talk about this today, despite the fact this is a video on French, because we need to think about how you do it in English first before we can think about how to do it in French. Just so to remind you before we move on, that a verb is an action word, so it's something you do. So you play, do, eat, think, like, be, have, all of those are verbs. So if you want to use these two often or sometimes, you'd have to put it in front of the verb. So that's your rule in English. Let's have a look at French to see if it's the same. We know there's going to be two different rules because they're separated into two sides, but let's see if it's the same rules. So firstly, we're going to have a look at examples for this side. We've got je joue au football tous les jours. Tous les jours, je joue au football. Or je joue au football de temps en temps. Would you say that it's the same rule as in English? It is. So again, in French, we have at the start or at the end of a sentence. It could be a clause within a sentence, but it's at the start or at the end of that clause. So je joue au football tous les jours. You wouldn't say in French, and I can tell you this, je joue tous les jours au football. It doesn't sound very natural at all. Let's have a look at the other two here and see if it's the same rule as in English, because already this one is the same as English. So, je joue souvent au football. Je fais quelquefois du skate. Je fais souvent de la natation. So our rule in English was that those words, often and sometimes, go just in front of the verb. Is it the same thing again? Let's remind ourselves what a verb is. It's an action word, something you do, play, do, eat, think, like, etc. So here is au, du, and de la. Are they verbs? They are not. So where is the verb in that sentence? So where's the verb play, for example? It is here. Faire means do, and that's do again. So it's not in front of the verb, it's actually after the verb or just after the verb. So this means that our rule in French is the same for those ones here as it is in English, but for these two, it's not. It's just after the verb. Okay, so these would be our rules in French for us to make sentences. So I hope you found this video helpful to build sentences and to say how often you do something.